Cool.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline from Young Dragon Slayers, and today we have DC Bradshaw, an educator, writer, game designer, and a dad, and a beloved member of the TTRPG community, particularly of the folks who like to run games for young players, and also the creator of D&D supplement Little But Fierce. We'll get to that in just a moment, but now I have to start with the boilerplate opening question for tabletop is how were you first introduced to tabletop role-playing games?
Okay, I'm not sure on this one because there's a couple of things. I think the
Oh.
first thing was actually Hero Quest, which I think was a lot of people's first entry into that. It was either that or the Steve Jackson, Ian Livingstone Fighting Fantasy books. I'm pretty sure Hero Quest just about came out first, but between those two, definitely into uh, the fantasy board gaming, and then segueing into a bit of role playing along the way. That was definitely the kickoff. It was me and my brother and some friends to begin with.
About how old were you when that obsession started to hit?
Oh, good grief! I'm not sure. I mean, probably I want to say seven, eight-ish or something like that.
Wow.
My dad, he he was a Games Workshop fan. He didn't really play much, but he loved painting the miniatures. I think I'm pretty sure you can probably correct me on this one. I'm pretty sure it's his idea to get Hero Quest to get us into it, and then my brother and I went
Mm.
into the whole Warhammer Games Workshop thing, and then that more became yeah, okay, let's try role playing games. I didn't actually play D&D until I was, in my, I want to say late 20s, possibly early 30s, but went round the houses with various other role playing games first.
How would you describe a little bit fierce in your own words?
Okay, so Little But Fierce is it's a rewrite of fifth edition. So not technically speaking a D&D supplement per se, but
True.
actually
That's my bad.
well, it depends. It's an independent game in its own right, or it could be considered a stepping stone up to, full kind of chunky RPGs. But in my mind, it's a rewrite of D&D 5th edition designed to make it accessible for kids of all ages. I say ideally kids six up. I know we do have some players who are younger than that, but also it's not narrowed down to just the younger audiences. It's generally designed to be more accessible. The rules are more streamlined. The language is simplified to get rid of some of that almost lawyer-esque nature to what you get with some
Mhm.
rules where it's got so many commas and parentheses in there you forget where the sentence actually started. Um, and also just removing some of those things that would maybe make it less family friendly. So we don't have things like explicit mentions of death, for example. I've removed some of those awful antiquated tropes that are still hanging around in a lot of RPGs nowadays that, by any logical sense should not be there anymore. So it's designed to be a more accessible, more family friendly, more streamlined version of 5th edition.
I'm super excited about it. I've been wanting to play test it with some various age groups, but the age-old difficulty of getting a group together haunts me. What inspired you to make this in the first place?
I mean, it was two reasons really. You referenced Rich of Hatchlings Games earlier. So I've been kind of hanging around in that scene a little bit for a while. I've met Rich. I've spoken an awful lot with Steph of Tabletop RPG Kids, though we've never actually met either virtually or in person yet. So I've always been interested in that sort of area. I was a teacher. I was a teacher for 10 years. So, working with kids in both, I'm something of a contradiction in this sense. I was a mathematics, computer science teacher who also did bits of drama. So I was kind of both ends of the kind of logical and creative spectrum and that. So, RPGs are very much my thing, and it absolutely makes
Mhm.
sense when you think of it like that. So I've always been interested in this sort of area and in looking at games that could be entryways into the hobby. But actually, more specifically, where that really came to a head was when my daughter was born, because I was thinking like, well, she may want to have a go at this hobby that Daddy seems to love so much, and I thought, well, what would be the entry thing to that? And I was thinking about things like Hero Quest and stuff like that, but I was thinking actually for a D&D type experience, what is the entryway into that? Is there a an obvious thing to go to? And there are some games out there that have that sort of feel, but maybe not explicitly the same sort of rules. I mean, there's things like No Thank You Evil, which is a wonderful introduction to the whole concept of a role-playing game, but with it's not very kind of crunchy in terms of the rules and stuff like that. It's more about the kind of creative play and the space for doing that. But I thought actually it's odd that there isn't a simplified version of fifth edition. There are some bits and pieces out there that Wizards of the Coast have produced, but they are more about the kind of thematically introducing kids to it rather than actually the rules. And so one day I thought, well, I'll just take a crack at it. I'll see how it goes, and started writing with just things like, well, let's try simplifying the stats. The classic, what's the difference in wisdom and intelligence? And I think a lot of people realize there is a difference, but then you think, well, could we make that simpler? Could we boil that down to a simpler concept? Well, we've got too many skills. Can we boil those down as well? And I just kind of went along those lines. And I set myself some pretty harsh rules while I was doing it to begin with, which I have loosened along the way a bit. But I thought, well, let's just try this. And then I suddenly realized I'd actually written it and it existed. And now I'm just adding to it and adding to it and adding to it.
Had you approaching Dungeons and Dragons specifically? There are a lot of tabletop games out there. You could have written your own. You referenced No Thank You Evil as sort of an independent standalone game. But what about Dungeons and Dragons made you want to rewrite and adapt it and make it so that younger children were able to play it?
Two reasons. I mean, really. One was sort of habit, to be honest. I'd written a few things for DM's Guild. So I'd already written a load of stuff for the kind of core D&D 5e system. So I was kind of used to writing for that. So I'd almost fallen into that trap of assuming it was the default. But also, I think because we're at this wonderful place where all this really geeky stuff is now much more mainstream. And maybe not everyone's playing it, but I think everyone is aware of it a lot more than perhaps they would have been. Or at least they've got a reasonable idea of what it is and what it isn't. We're seeing that more and more with some of the video games becoming more mainstream. Obviously, there was the glorious movie that came out a couple of years ago, which it's criminal it doesn't have a sequel, to be honest. And I think, therefore, my kind of assumption was that a lot of people would look at this hobby and go, I want to play D&D. And actually giving them a D&D like experience was very important to me. I thought, well, I could go down another line, but my starting point was, can I simplify? Can I streamline? And if I found that I couldn't do it, I think I probably would have gone either to do my own system or gone off in a very sort of tangential direction, almost in the way that the kind of the Pathfinder team did. They started with something that was very much like, I think it was 3.5 edition, and then they started making it more and more its own thing. So I kind of started with that, and then I never really broke away from it, because while I would love people to keep playing Little But Fierce, I do accept the fact there's probably going to be a good chunk of the audience who play it as a gateway into then playing full D&D or something similar like a Pathfinder or any number of games, to be honest.
You mentioned both you and your mom were teachers. Does that run in your family, or is that just a you and your mom thing?
A little bit, to be honest.
Okay.
My mum's a primary school teacher, and my stepdad was a primary school teacher as well. So there's a little bit of a history of it. I think we're generally overachievers in my family. There's a long line of doctors down my dad's side and stuff like that, So we're all very academic. But yeah, there's definitely a good thread of teachers in the family.
What do you bring to Little But Fierce from being a teacher, do you think?
Oh, I mean, that's an interesting one. It's a lot, to be honest. I mean, I think language is a big thing. I think
Yes.
inevitably, because I was a maths teacher, that was where I started off. I I so often, basically every day, I had to find other ways of explaining something, especially a concept that I understood incredibly well, and I was explaining it to people who had never encountered it before, no matter what it was, whether it was long division or fractions or something like that, and actually finding the easiest way to boil down a concept in order to explain it to someone. That became an absolute running theme throughout all of this. I would inevitably write something and go, that's fine, but I think there's a simpler version of that idea. I'll put it there for now. And my way of editing inevitably is I highlight it in yellow as a problem for future Dave, and then I'll come back to it later. Make it exist first, make it good second. But I think that's one of the primary things I do bring to it is how can I explain this in an easier manner? Because it was something I was doing day in, day out, especially in maths. A lot, I think it's all manner of aspects to it. It's the family friendly part of it. It's not about making it babyish. And that's a really important thing I've said along the way. It's like, well, I've said ages 6+. That does not mean it's exclusively for like ages 6, 7, and 8. It's just meant to be accessible for everyone. So it's about trying to be aware of the things that maybe we take for granted and the things that actually, why do I have to go down this route when there's a nicer way of doing it? Which I think you find an awful lot when you're a teacher. You always got that switch in your head, which is no, if you're going to use an example, a pop culture reference or something, choose something that's more, that's less 18 rated or something. It's similar to the don't swear in front of the kids switch, So a lot of that along the way is like, what's the best way I can present this? Whether it's from tone, whether it's from language, whether it's from making it less complicated, and all of that are skills I would use day in, day out.
That makes perfect sense for both the sides of like making something that's all age appropriate and the uh easier it looks so easy, but doing it is so hard of explaining something complex or boiling something down to be able to explain it to somebody. I kind of wanted to go through. We've talked a lot about like what you tried to do with Little But Fierce, um, but I'm curious to hear like specific things that you put into the game. And I have the a couple of pillars, if you will, of like accessible, inclusive, safe, and fun. We can start with accessible because I feel like that's something that we've talked a lot about. You talked about language changes. You talked about rules being simplified. What other things did you modify in rewriting D&D to make it a more accessible game?
I mean, so yeah, as you said, we've talked about language in terms of simplifying. Like I said, it was about boiling it down to the simplest concept. I mean, I'll give an example of that one. So, D&D fifth edition, there are 6 ability scores, and I actually lose track of how many skills. It's in the region of 20 or something like that. I decided I want to make it as simple as possible, and because I like novelty of these sorts of things, I tried to make it. I wanted to have 4 skills, and I either wanted it to spell out a word because I love whimsical stuff like that, or to go alliterative. And I couldn't make it spell a word, so I went alliterative. And that's why we've ended up with strength, speed, smarts, and smiles as the 4 ability scores. And then hanging off of them, we've got 9 skills. We've got fitness, toughness, hiding, stealing, finding, knowing, understanding, performing, and talking. And I've tried to make sure that then each one of them, it's kind of obvious when you would use it and when you wouldn't use it. Whereas inevitably, even the most experienced D&D players sometimes go, oh, is this an insight check? Or is it, no, 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 no. Okay, maybe it's just a straight intelligence roll. Is this survival? Well, maybe it's not survival. I want to make it easier to go, right, it's one of those, just go with it. So loads of things like that in terms of just making the rules more accessible. One of the other things I included along the way in this is in the hero sheet, so the character sheet equivalent, I've tried to use pictures wherever possible, especially on the front page. So each of the skills and abilities has a very clear picture of it that I got from the Noun Project, which is an amazing resource for
Yes.
images that are either in Creative Commons or you can use them for free as long as you credit the original artist. And that was actually a piece of advice from Steph at Tabletop RPG Kids, because it means that those players who maybe reading is not their strong suit, they can just go, right, it's the picture of the person running. I know that's speed, even if reading the word speed is maybe a little bit, challenging. Cool. So what we have on screen here is you've got the first of the 4 pages of the hero sheet. So we've covered bits of this already. As you can see, we've got space for you to write basic details about your character. We've got the 4 abilities down the left-hand side. We've got skills hanging off of them. We have little circles to represent training, the equivalent of proficiency, and little stars for expertise. We have resistances at the bottom here, which is your equivalent of saving throws, and then some of the other things you would expect to see on a D&D character sheet. We've got what their movement is, awareness, which is like passive perception, defense, and we've got recovery rolls, which is the less scary version of death saving throws. So I've tried to make this front page really, really easy to use so that, especially if you are just wanting to introduce that, maybe that first game, don't worry about equipment too much. Don't worry about, all the other bits and bobs, like traits and all this kind of stuff that you could attach to it. Just make it really easy to go, right, here is your hero sheet. Here are their stats. Now you know what to add to everyone. And on the note of adding to roles, I've completely got rid of the basic ability numbers. By that I mean, if you're a seasoned D&D player, you will know that you have got the ability score and the ability modifier. And this is where I'm going to mess this up. So like a 12 in strength is like a +1. So when you roll something, you add 1 to it. The actual number itself is used so infrequently in the D&D rules. There's the odd thing. There's like encumbrance or something like that. If you're trying to calculate the amount of pounds of weight you can carry, use your actual strength score. But in like 99% of times, and I don't think I'm even exaggerating that. If anything, I'm being a bit conservative on that one. You just need to use the ability scores. So I'm just using the ability scores. So it's just a number, and I've actually shifted everything. So by default, everything is a positive number. There are some creatures in the Storyteller's Guide section that have negative scores, but by default, players' heroes will always have positive scores that they add to stuff. So you're not having to worry about negative numbers yet. It just makes it that little bit easier, especially for starting off.
Mm-hmm. Is that mostly a mathematical thing, or is that also a little bit psychological as well?
A bit of both, to be honest. Yeah, it's make the maths easier, definitely, especially if we're playing with very much younger players. But also, as you say, psychological. No one likes the idea of having a -3 in something. Having a +1 still feels like you're adding something, and it makes it, if you're awesome at something, and you've got like a +5 or a +6 in it, it makes you feel like godly. That you are absolutely incredible at it. So yeah, there's a bit of both on that one. Yeah, so that's the main page, which is used for an awful lot of stuff. I then got 3 more pages. Page 2 will be used for every single hero. So page 2, which you can see, actually, you've got 2 versions of it, this one, because I had to have a slight variation for characters who potentially get their powers from gods, and that was a whole thing I had to get around in terms of whether we want to include that. So I've got actually 2 versions of this to make it easier. But this is a little bit more about their character. It lets them write down any class powers they've got, keep track of their equipment, weapons, and stuff like that. But what I really want to draw your attention to is this top bit here, which is my answer to alignment. I have never liked alignment. I find it incredibly, for something that should be quite a simple concept, like boil down the whole of human morality into 9 different boxes, it's really difficult to actually say, what does neutral good mean? What does chaotic evil mean? And the number of people I know who don't use alignment is basically everyone I know. It just doesn't help. So what I decided to do was do like a little questionnaire instead. So I've got 5 questions on this one. I've got under the topic of right and wrong, Are they nice to strangers, and do they normally follow the rules? And it gives you an idea about their
Yeah.
base instinct in terms of, are they kind, are they mean, are they a bit of a rebel, or do they follow the rules to a T? It gets that notion on that. And then we get into happy and sad. What hobbies do they enjoy, and what really scares them, which gives them, less about their morality but more about what makes them tick. And then the last one there under hopes and dreams, what do they want to do when they eventually get old and stop questing? And it gives an idea of a bit of a vision. Even if you don't know much about your hero, maybe they're a very, very one-dimensional, two-dimensional character. It gives you an idea of, what do they want to do? No one wants to be, trudging through dungeons for the rest of their days. So why are they doing it? Is it so they can buy a castle? Is it so they can run a shop? Is it so they can get 9,000 cats on an island? It just is an idea for players to really easily come up with the what does make their character tick. Rather than are they neutral good, are they lawful evil, and I include that even in pre-written adventures for significant NPCs. I have a little questionnaire to say about this person to really help that storyteller go, okay, how am I going to play this person? What is their little quirk? What is the thing that makes them different? Especially what is that thing that I don't like. I love putting in for NPCs, especially villains, something that really scares them, especially if it's really silly. Whether it's spiders or whatever it might be. I think what makes the scary thing scared, I think, is it can be a whole lot of fun. I mean, it's a very telling thing in any context, but I think especially in a game that it can be has the potential to be incredibly silly. I think you can have a huge amount of fun on that one. And from there, we've got some ways to keep track of spells, which I've just tried to make easier where humanly
Do the
possible, just
best
by
you can.
guiding them through it a little bit. And then I've got a little quick reference sheet on the end for anyone who might use creatures. So whether you are a druid who can turn into a creature, if you are a mage who can summon a creature, if you are a knight who has got their noble steed, whatever it is, it's just a little template to help you keep track of creature stats that you might be using in and out. And pages 3 and 4, they're not for every character, but they're available if you need them.
What are the ways that you have designed this game to be inclusive? It's very clear from the art, from the people that you have involved, like Jennifer Kretschmer, that that's something that's really important. That's also something that's important to me as a game master. Tell us about some of the work that you did to make this an inclusive game so that everyone is able to play it and see themselves in it.
I think the absolute basics of this one was to, as I said, to get rid of some of those tropes and assumptions that seem to be just ingrained into so many systems. And sadly, it's the ones where there are some players who are maybe stuck in their ways, who can't see anything other than that. I mean, like, here's a really simple one on this one. I made sure that no kin, which is my equivalent of races or species, no kin in here is inherently evil. So we have orcs and goblins as playable kin from the start, and there is nothing that suggests that they are in any way barbaric or any kind of anything that even, I mean, that morally suggests that they are by default the bad guys, and definitely nothing that, we all know, sadly, that there are some horrible tropes still out there with orcs being based on very kind of racist depictions of kind of, barbaric savages and stuff like that, which is horrendous that is even in there. And yet we still see it. We still see it in reactions to, when the latest version of D&D 5th edition came out, with reactions to orc artwork. There was some wonderful, I think it was a
Yeah.
double page spread, which kind of showed almost like a family of orcs, going out adventuring, and the bigots descended, sadly,
Mm.
saying that this absolutely wasn't on, and it was woke and whatever other nonsense they want to throw at it. So I try to make sure that there is nothing in there that means things are inherently evil in there, because there's just absolutely no need for it. I've tried to make sure that there is nothing that. I tried not to make assumptions about the players or the heroes they want to play. I mean, the fact is, This is a game, and a game should be to have fun, and it should be a safe space for having fun. I think it's fair to say that a lot of people who end up playing D&D either as kids or as adults, there are an awful lot of introverts out there,
Hmm.
and I think it's really important that, this sort of game is a safe space to explore. It's a safe space to play the character. Maybe it's who you wish you were. Maybe it's exploring something you've never explored before. Maybe it's the little person inside of you who just wants to get out. I mean, we know as adults, especially, and playing with teens, that so often, games like this are used as an exploration of all manner of things, whether it's, body dysmorphia, whether it's exploring notions of gender or sexuality. And I'm not saying,
Yeah.
oh, we want 6-year-olds exploring their sexuality. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it needs to be a safe space that if little Tommy decides he wants to make, a female elf, cool. That's it. It's cool. No worries.
Yeah.
There is
Don't make a thing
nothing.
of it.
Exactly. It's a chance for them to play something that they're enjoying it, and that's it. I think some of the other things I wanted to include on this one, and this was really important when I was first talking to my artist Katerina on this one. And I just want to take a moment to shout out Katerina. Katerina, who does not blow her own trumpet enough, frankly. Katerina Uzebiu. I've known for a while. We met through a mutual friend. She'd illustrated a load of my stuff for some of my 5th edition stuff. And when I first produced the starter edition for Little But Fierce, I said, look, I just need one bit of artwork on the cover. And she very kindly produced a lovely little bit of artwork that you can still see on the starter edition, which is a barbarianified version of my daughter with
That's your daughter?
yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my
Little
God.
ginger barbarian. And then next to her is a black cat, kind of familiar, not familiar per se, but an animal companion who was based on my cat Felicia, who sadly is no longer with us. So my daughter and my first cat are immortalized on the cover, and those characters are still on the cover of the new one. But I always said, look, when I produce a physical edition of this, when I crowdfund this, when I bite the bullet and actually do the dreaded Kickstarter, you're the artist. It's as simple as that. And then when I said, look, I'm finally doing this, we had a chat and she very happily agreed to come on board. And my kind of brief for the cover was, and I made it very simple. I said, look, I want to have 4 characters and the cat charging towards a monster we can't see. And I want to have a wonderfully diverse set of heroes on the cover because I want any kid or teenager or adult who looks at that cover to go, that could be a character I want to play. What I don't want is, I don't want 4 white kids on there. I want to make sure that we've got kind of human-looking races and the more animal races on there. I want to make sure, and I was very clear on this one, I want to have a character in a wheelchair on there. I have been so inspired by the amazing work that Mark Thompson has done with the combat wheelchair.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that I had a character in a wheelchair on the cover because, as I said, I wanted anyone who looked at it to go, that could be me or that could be my character. And I love the fact we have a character on there, the kind of gnomish rogue on there. Is a gnome of color, but actually, if you look carefully, you'll see they've got particular on there. So they've got kind of slightly patchy coloration to their skin, and that was Katerina's idea. And second, she said, "It's like yes, we have to do it. We absolutely have to do it." I want to make sure that we've that we see this throughout all of the book. Sometimes it's through those key protagonist characters that you see on the cover who will pop up again and again. But I want to make sure that when we get to the kin pages, when we get the class pages, that we get a real range of, everything about the human and non-human condition that we've got on there. So we've got all kinds of characters. I want to make sure that we've got male characters, female characters. I want to make sure we've got slightly more androgynous or non-binary characters. We've got all manner of kin. We've got tall people, short people, fat people, thin people. I want a range of disabilities on there as well because I want to make sure that that basically any player can pick up this book, flick through it, and they find someone who is sort of like them, or could be a character that they might want to play. And that's not saying that if you are, for example, a person who uses a wheelchair, that you're going to want to create a character that has a wheelchair, but I want to give them that option. And very importantly, and I include this explicitly in the instruction for the players and the storyteller, that if they choose to say have a character who is disabled or has a disability, or are, for example, larger, shorter, taller, whatever it is, there is no intrinsic disadvantage to them playing that character that way. If they want to have their character and the rules behave differently because of it, that's fine, but that's their choice. It's for them to approach their storyteller and say, actually, how I want to handle it is like a bit like this. And then there's a conversation. It was a really important conversation that I had when I spoke to Jen Kretschmer, who I am so pleased has come on board with this project. I knew from the start I wanted a disability consultant, and the first person top of my list was like,
yeah, she's it.
I wonder if Jen Kretschmer would do it. And she said yes straight away. And I was so happy. But she gave a specific example of, if you've got, for example, a hero who has got a prosthetic hand, say, so the default would be, if you've got a hero who's got a prosthetic hand, it's almost, for lack of a better term, cosmetic. But from a rules perspective, by default, there is no bonus or penalty to anything they do because they've got a prosthetic hand. But they may go to the storyteller and say, look, my character's got a prosthetic hand. So does that mean that, for example, if they got bitten by like a wolf, that actually they maybe wouldn't be hurt as bad? Or if they were bitten by a spider, they can't be poisoned? And the storyteller might go, no, that absolutely makes sense. They're not going to feel any pain. They're not going to have poison go into their hand. But that might, if they can't feel things like that with their prosthetic hand, maybe that means if you're searching for traps, might be a little bit trickier for you because actually you can't feel, the fine bits where the secret door might be on the wall. So maybe there's, some good things and some bad things, and that's a conversation. It is not the story to saying you must do this and you can't do that, and if you're in a wheelchair, I'm sticking stairs everywhere and you can't go anywhere, and it's the choice of the player. If they want their hero to be whatever they want them to be, whatever, it is up to them to propose to the storyteller if they would like anything different about the rules and what that might look like. It's about trust. It is a verbal contract between the two of them. It's about having fun. Sadly, and I don't like having to talk about this, but I think it's important that I do. Because I've got a hero with in a wheelchair on the cover, I had an interesting reaction the second I started advertising this. Now, I had to bite the bullet. A few months ago, I realized, look, in order to get the momentum on this, I may have to pay for some advertising. And sadly, one of the easiest ways of doing that is to advertise through Meta. Because a lot of people are on Instagram, a lot of people are on Facebook, a lot of people are on Threads. Interestingly, response on Instagram was very, very positive. There wasn't much in the way of negative anything. On Facebook, it was a battle from the get-go. Immediately, there were people reacting with laughing emojis. There were people commenting, and it was exactly what you would expect it to be. It would be things like, "Oh, in a world full of magic, I can't believe they can't fix their legs." And it was just bigoted nonsense. And I just blocked that straight away, hid it. It's like, I'm not even going to engage with this, because if that's their response, I'm not going to convince them of anything. And they may well even know, and they're just rage baiting, and I'm just not going to engage with it. And that was a bit of a battle. I'm not going to lie. I had to reach out to some friends and say, look, if you see this advert, just give it a like, chuck a comment on. I just want to make sure that the balance is in the direction it should be. And interestingly, when I did my second campaign of this, didn't happen at all on the Facebook advert, because actually there was enough people at the start who were giving thumbs up and hearts and positive comments that clearly the bigots went, I'm not going to engage with this. They didn't think they could tip that balance into kind of negative mindsets, for which I'm very glad.
Tell us a little bit about the ways that you make the game safe for all players. There are some mechanics in the original D&D that deal with that, but you've put some extra effort into modifying things like safety tools and modifying the content. Tell us a bit about how you did that to endeavor to make the game safe for all ages.
Yeah, there's a lot to this one, and it kind of falls into two buckets for me. There is guidance for the storyteller, and there is making sure that the rules and the content is again family friendly. I know it's a very blanket term, but I think those are kind of the two major buckets here. So I'll talk first about the storyteller's handbook. I say handbook, the storyteller's guidelines section of the book, which starts off with a chapter called Having Fun. It very clearly sets out for the storyteller kind of the expectations that they are what they are empowered with here. It's about establishing trust. It is about having almost what we would consider to be those session zero conversations. Making sure everyone knows what sort of game this is and what sort of game they want it to be. I use an example on there, which I actually shamelessly stole, as all writers do, from someone else. Specifically, this was from Till Dice Do Us Part podcast, who suggested the idea of thinking about movie genres. That actually, movie genres are really useful to say, look, I want to play a game that feels like this or something that's a bit like that, because it gives us those touchstones, especially for kids who maybe don't have the literary vocabulary to go, I want it to be gothic horror or something. They maybe don't know what gothic horror is, but I want it to be a bit like Nightmare Before Christmas. That gets you a little bit into that, I get where you're going with this, but you've got to be specific. Because, as using this example from Till Dice Do Us Part, if you say you want to play a game that's like Batman, that can mean an awful lot of things. That could go all the way from, I'm going to show my age on this one, Adam West Batman or Lego Batman or something like that, all the way up to The Dark Knight and the Robert Pattinson films. Those are very, very different genres. So you've got to be very specific, and actually encourages that conversation of what sort of films would you like this to be like? And then you can almost do the Venn diagram and go, actually, if I did something that was a bit like this, it would tick enough boxes for everyone. So that's there at the get-go about, make sure that everyone's agreeing to play the same game. Rather than one person thinking they're playing Lord of the Rings and one person, thinking that they're doing some sort of slapstick comedy. They're going to come into conflict very, very quickly. I'm not saying it's impossible, but have that before you start playing. Because you want everyone to come out of a session going, that was fun, not this isn't what I thought it was going to be. There are suggestions for modifying the rules, to take things out that maybe... that steers us towards what you want it to be. The suggestions like, well, maybe you could not have combat. We know that combat is kind of an intrinsic part of D&D, and it is the rules for what I call action scenes, which can include fighting. Are absolutely there in Little But Fierce, but they're not required. There's a repeated theme in there that actually defeating a creature does not necessarily mean knocking them out. It could be overcoming them in other way. It could be tricking them. It could be sneaking round them. And they should get the same rewards for however they overcome that obstacle. They don't just have to hit it with a big stick. There's a great example. I think it was the author Patrick Rothfuss talked about playing D&D with his son. And he had a no fighting rule and actually gave him magic items that kind of encourage that. In my mind, it's the almost Monkey Island way of solving problems. If I give you, like a magic rope and a ring of invisibility, and a bottle of infinite water, how can you navigate, getting round and tricking people, and navigating through a dungeon without combat, and you can still have an incredibly fun game doing that, rather than I'm going to mow my way through the next load of skeletons or whatever it might be. So there's lots of suggestions on how you can tailor the game and everything is optional. Essentially, you can take stuff out if you want to have none of that. You can do that. And I've got another example on there. The what I call the dead cats aren't fun suggestion, which is that I think we've all been in the situation where we thought, wouldn't it be great to play a character that's got an animal companion? And then you are very hesitant to use that animal companion because you're afraid it's going to get killed. And so there's a suggestion in there, if someone's wants to have an animal companion, that's great. To have that verbal contract with them. Say, look, I promise I am never going to make your animal companion get harmed unless you actively do something that is going to put them in danger. So you can't have Buttons the cat that I'm just going to ablatively put in front of me as I run towards the hail of arrows. That's not going to go well for Buttons. But equally, if a fireball goes off, Buttons will hide behind something. He will jump inside your pack. He will hide behind a tree or something like that. He will never get accidentally hurt. And that gives you, again, assuming you've got that trust, and there should always be trust at the table, it means that everyone can always know to going, I can do something fun and I'm not going to accidentally do something horrible. So there's loads of suggestions of stuff like that in there to make sure that it's a fun experience for everyone. And you've got that guidance in there. We've also got safety tools in there. I've got the notion of an X card in there. A traffic light system as a suggestion that you can have your green, amber, and red bits of paper on the table, so that if everyone's green, we're all good. Amber means I'm feeling a little uncomfortable. Red means we stop, and we stop right now, and then we take a break and we talk it through. I also put the suggestion of a remote control in there, that actually at any time someone can go pause. Equally, someone could say fast forward, as in, I don't mind this happening, but I don't want to hear the nitty gritty of it. Let's take the example, if something was scary, say, or something was, almost gory, I hope you're not doing, blood and guts with kids, but, maybe just it's a little bit too grisly. We can fast forward to after this scene. We can jump to the next chapter and, you've now made it through that room, and let's carry on. Equally, you could rewind and go, actually, can we do that again? Not because I don't like the roles that I got, but actually, I didn't quite realize the consequence of that thing. And maybe we just weren't clear in our communication of what was going on here. So I've got those suggestions of tools you can have up front to make sure that everyone continues to have a fun game and there's no nasty surprises in there. The other bits and pieces on there, which I've kind of alluded to so far, we don't have a notion of death in there. It's not mentioned explicitly. I mean, even things like undead creatures, they're called the Lost. It's a very vague term. We know it's skeletons, we know it's zombies, but we don't need to be quite so on the nose with it. Mm-hmm. I have the notion that if you fail through recovery rolls, you are knocked out. Well, you're knocked out when you fall unconscious. If you fail through recovery rolls, you are badly hurt, which is just kind of a blanket term for the fact that, you're not able to continue. You're probably going to need to go to a hospital and be patched up. And the end result is, realistically, you can't carry on playing this hero. That actually maybe their twin brother or someone else going to need to come in, but they're not explicitly dead on this one. And I actually stick in a bonus simple spell, which is my equivalent of cantrips on there, called Get Help, which is basically, from a power sense, it doesn't quite work in that it's way too powerful, but it actually is nice in that it's an optional simple spell that means that if someone is badly hurt, you can cast Get Help and they teleport back to a place of safety where they can recover. So again, there's none of that, we can't leave them in the bottom of the volcano because something terrible will happen. So we cast Get Help. They've gone back to the town. They're still badly hurt. They're going to need years to get better and get back on their feet, and maybe we'll see them next time, but they can't adventure anymore. So it's just a nice way of navigating the consequences without forcing them into cope with something that could potentially be traumatic on that one. And the last one and this was an odd one, was religion. Was an interesting one on this one. I come from a religious background. In fact, my dad is a reverend, so I'm a literal son of a preacher man. So I grew up with religion in my life. But I realized when thinking about the initial classes of this one that inevitably you always end up with a cleric type character in there. And clerics are potentially problematic. We know from historically with things like Satanic Panic and stuff like that, and that actually the notion of having a character who worships a fictional deity. For some people, it's fine, especially if they love their mythology. It's like, well, I'm going to be a
Or
priest of,
Zeus,
Zeus
yeah.
or something like that. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely fine. Not a problem with that. Not the case for every family, though. Actually, if they're from a deeply religious household, the notion of actually having a character who is worshipping, you know, a fictional deity or something like that, that might not sit well. So what I did in the starter edition, the digital starter edition that I released 3 years ago, is I had druids instead of priests or clerics or anything like that in there to make sure that actually that healer type role was something nature based. I think everyone is kind of okay with that. Someone who gets their powers from the earth and animals and plants and stuff like that, it landed a lot better. And I also made sure I didn't have any angelic or demonic creatures in there because it just opens unnecessary doors. And a lot of that's carried through into the full physical edition. I still don't have angelic and demonic creatures in there. I do have them in some digital add-ons, but I explicitly say, look, these kind of imp characters, you can make them demons or you could just make them, other types of creatures. It's not a problem. I did include priests in the full edition, but I have specific guidance saying, look, you want to have a conversation with this player, about how they want to handle this. Do they want to say who their character's deity is? They don't have to. That's fine. If they do, it could be their real deity. If they're actually religious, if they are, for example, Christian, they could imagine it's the Christian God. If they're Muslim, it could be Allah. That could be fine. It could be a mythological deity. It could be something they've made up. But don't assume. Don't assume.
Mm-hmm.
Have that conversation with them. And then equally, as when we saw the hero sheet earlier, I asked some questions about if they are playing a priest, they've got some extra boxes on there that basically say who gives them their powers, what are they like, so that they can get a notion of this fictional deity. Are they, are they a fire god? Are they, are they a creature about, love and care and stuff like that? It just gives them a little bit more to play with here. And again, makes that a safe conversation and a comfortable conversation if they want to have it. Again, rather than just assuming that they're totally cool and their family's totally cool with having a game that potentially steps on the toes of something that's very important to them personally.
What, for folks who are like somewhat familiar with things like Dungeons and Dragons or are curious and are maybe parents of young kids or know young kids who are curious but unsure, what would you say to them about like advice for introducing tabletop RPGs to young kids or ways that you've seen them be beneficial in your own experience and other people's experience? What would you tell them?
For anyone wanting to start out playing these sorts of games with their kids, I think the fundamentals, first of all, is what are you hoping that they will get out of it, and what do they want to get out of it? I think that those are absolutely critical. That you kind of meet in the middle of that one of, why are we playing this game? Because as basically a daily conversation with my 6-year-old goes, you know, you if you're introducing them to something new, you do kind of have to get it right, because otherwise, whether it's a film, a TV show, a new game, a choice of food, if the initial reaction is, getting them back on board is going to be tough. So making sure from the get-go kind of what they want to get out of it, and probably tailoring it to their interests, I think is really, really important. I think there would undoubtedly be a risk of, I want to introduce my kid to gaming, so I want to run my kind of campaign for them and just make it a bit more kiddie. It's like, no, choose something they like, and go from there. If they really like, Spidey and His Amazing Friends or Paw Patrol or something like that, do a version of that. Equestrian Adventure Bay, as a way of starting this off, because that gets them into what this is and what this can be. And then they might go, but that was really good. But what about something more like that? Or can we do something like that? Well, that's not how your games work, Daddy. And then you can start going down that direction and start simple. Really start simple is a really important thing. Don't chuck it in all at once because there's a risk that you'll scare them off. So I'd say those are kind of fundamental things to start from is what do they want to get out of it? And I think the other thing to remember about all of this is it is fundamentally about having fun. And that's a question on the way. There's nothing wrong with fudging some dice rolls along the way if it facilitates everyone having fun. And remember, it's a safe space for play. I think that's an absolutely critical one. Um, there is the quote originally is about creativity. There is a wonderful educator, sadly no longer with us, called Sir Ken Robinson, and he does it's a TED talk called "Our Schools Killing Creativity" or words to that effect. And it's well worth a watch or listen. And he quotes Picasso as part of this with a quote of, all children are born artists. The trouble is to remain an artist as we grow up. If all kids have imaginations and don't have a problem playing make believe and having fun and don't worry too much about what other people think about it. And as adults, we get very, very, even the most extroverted people, they're extroverted within the parameters of which they are okay to be extroverted. If they love going out to clubs and love dancing, they'll do that. But if you say, do you want to do a bit of amateur dramatics, they might go, whoa, 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 no, 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 because they're extroverted within the confines of the things they are happy doing. So the fundamental about role-playing games with kids, with vulnerable people, with adults, it's all about a safe space for play. And never, ever forget that. And if you are the storyteller, the dungeon master, whatever you want to call them, your job is to facilitate that, to make sure everyone is having fun, and to make sure that you keep that spoken or unspoken contract of trust. There will always be someone who thinks, oh, it'd be really cool to surprise them with this and it'll scare them, jump scare them. But if you break that trust, fundamentally, something has gone wrong here, and people will no longer be having fun. So that's critical.
We're getting close to time. Where can people find you and where can people find Little But Fierce? What is their avenue to actually sit down and play this game?
I have a website, dcbradshaw.com. You can find links to all my stuff on there. So that's a good starting point. If you want to find me on socials, the main places, honestly, the main place, to be honest, is Blue Sky. That's where I spend a lot of stuff. And I'm at dcbradshaw.com on there. I am on Threads. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. You can search those places and you will find me. I either DC Bradshaw or DC Bradshaw RPG on all of them if I couldn't grab DC Bradshaw on there. The Kickstarter itself, a little bit fierce. Well, actually, on that note, the digital edition is already available. So that is available through DriveThruRPG. It's on itch.io. You can get it directly from my website. And there are $1 community copies of the starter edition as well, which is exactly the same content. You get exactly the same thing. It just costs $1 rather than $9.95. And I would say this, if you want to play this game with your kids, whether that's your kids or you're a teacher and it's your class or you're a librarian or you're a scout leader or something like that, if you want to play this with your kids, but money is an issue, there is nothing wrong with saying that. It's a tough world right now. Please, please, please use one of those $1 community copies. It's absolutely fine. For the full edition, Little But Fierce is kicking off on the 3rd of March and will run for 28 days. You'll be able to get the full digital edition, the full physical edition. It's going to be fulfilled through DriveThruRPG at the end there. So the printing will be print on demand that comes out at the end of this, which will hopefully make it easier for people to get that shipped to them without delays and avoiding dreaded tariffs and stuff like that. Because within the US, it'll be printed within the US. Outside of the US, it'll be printed outside of the US. So you'll be able to get that on Kickstarter. And I hope there will be a link in, below here if this is a
Of
video,
course.
or wherever it may need to be. But yes, just search for Little But Fierce. And I'm very pleased to say that if you search for Little But Fierce on Google, you do now get me as the top hit, which took a very, very long time. But you get that. I have managed to bump Shakespeare from that one because for those who have
Congratulations.
not realized this, the name Little But Fierce is shamelessly stolen and rearranged. It is a quote from Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Though she be but little, she is fierce. And I took it, switched it around, and it's the name of my game. But somehow, if you search for Little But Fierce, I am now the top hit, which is awesome.
Congratulations. Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
meeting with me, for talking about your work. Thanks to everyone for watching. You can find the links to the stuff we talked about down below, and check out some of what Young Dragon Slayers does if you're curious about Dungeons and Dragons. Bye.